Good evening, everyone. How are you all tonight? Nice to see you. Yes, let's hear it for our special event tonight. My name is Joel Whitney. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this series, Colloquy 6, which we'll introduce in just a moment. If anyone's here for the first time, special welcome. It's not always easy to find this space down here, but once you are here, you're in your own home, as we like to say. I'm part of the team that curates the arts and culture events, and as we get going with this, I just want to remind you of a few things that are coming up. We have, next week we have a celebration, a postscript kind of celebration of our two winners for the BPL Book Prize. J.M. Brenner and socially, last name escaping me, but you can find their proper names on BPL Presents, which is written behind me, and on our social media tags. And after our event tonight, after our readers and your moment to ask them questions in the Q&A, we'll encourage you to buy some books from our friends at Unnameable Press and get them signed as well from our readers tonight. Does that sound good to you all? All right, I hope you'll stay in touch with us. I am going to turn it over to our two presiders tonight, and why don't you just make yourselves comfortable and welcome them out here on stage. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Hello, can you hear me? I'm Matvey Yankelevich. I'm really pleased to be introducing this event with Marta Del Pozo. I'll just say a few words about Colloquy. This is the sixth installation of this series, which we've started which World Poetry started in the fall, in October. The regular curator of this series is C. Francis Fisher, and we've had a ton of events. Recently, an event with Clemente Soto Velez at Clemente Soto Velez on Caribbean, translating the Caribbean. Before that, at BPL, we had an event on translating Francophonie from all kinds of French from all kinds of places. So if you'd like to get to the next Colloquy reading, I believe it's on June 2nd at Unnameable Books. That's Colloquy number 7, and that will be emerging translators who have first books out recently. And you can also follow us at the Eventbrite for Colloquy. You can also sign up on the mailing list at worldpoetrybooks.com. World Poetry is a small press, nonprofit press based in New York. We are, as our name suggests, devoted to poetry and translation. And we have lots of books coming out. You'll see some of them at the front. We have collaborated with a number of people for this Colloquy series, and we're really grateful to BPL and Joel and the whole team for hosting us again here, and we hope to be here again in the future with this series. The series is also broadcast live by Montez Press Radio, and we have a great partnership with them, and we thank Stacy Skolnick, who's in the audience, and so you can also listen to the event later. They archive it. Your friends who aren't in New York can listen to the broadcast live, etc. So I won't say much more about World Poetry, but I wanted to mention one of our other co-sponsors for tonight's event is Belladonna Collaborative, which publishes the work of women and feminist writers who are adventurous, experimental, politically involved, multiform, impossible to define, unpredictable, and dangerous with language. I think they've been going since like '99. And importantly, they will be releasing a book by Leela Zembarain I should add, in 2010, Belladonna began the publication of full-length poetry books, and in fall 2023 will publish Lila's Matrix Lux in a translation by Lorenzo Bueno, who I think is here. So we're excited about that publication and thank Belladonna for collaborating with us on this event. And also, we are really happy to have Marta Del Pozo from Quantum Prose, who will say just something about that publishing house.
Thank you, Matvey, and thank you everyone for being here tonight in this very special night. I am very excited. I met Matvey many years ago when I moved to New York to do my MFA in creative writing at NYU with my advisor, Lila Thembarain. So it's a lot of combinations and conjugations that are happening tonight in this room for me personally and professionally. When I first came to New York, I volunteered for Ugly Duckling Press. That's where I met you. And eventually, with the inspiration of all my classmates at the MFA, I see some of them in this room, I came up with the idea of also dedicating myself to this beautiful world of poetry and publishing. And that's where we're here today. I'm here today as the founding editor of Quantum Prose, which is also dedicated to world poetry. We do a lot of publications in translation, and also, as the name suggests, we are also interested in the language of sciences and the dialogue with other languages, also the pictorial. So we have a very interesting and eclectic catalog that is very it bends the genres, the literary genres, so you can check us out in our website, and thank you for being here tonight.
And then I will introduce our first readers. I want to say again that the books for Quantum Prose and some books from Belladonna and World Poetry are out in the front, so afterwards we will have a signing. You'll have a chance to chat with the authors and translators. I hope I'm not forgetting any of the other intro things I should have said. But Joel probably covered everything else. No? I'm not forgetting. Okay, good. And thank you all for coming. So please welcome our first readers for tonight. Jeanette L. Clarion is the author of 15 collections of poetry, 6 of which have been translated into English. I guess now 7 with this book. Her poetry has also been translated into Italian, Arabic, French, Romanian, and Portuguese. She herself has translated the complete works of Elizabeth Bishop and Primo Levi into Spanish and is the founding editor of Vaso Roto, a very well-known Spanish-language publisher of world poetry based in Mexico. So we're at World Poetry delighted to be publishing Jeanette for many reasons. And the translator of this book, Goddesses of Water, is Samantha Schnee, who just arrived from Houston 10 minutes ago. Samantha is the founding editor of Words Without Borders. Her translation of Carmen Bulos's El Libro de Eva, a finalist for the Mario Vargas Llosa Biennial Novel Prize, will be published by Deep Vellum this year. Or has it already been published? Almost. Today is the pub date. Congratulations to Samantha. Another reason to gather here. So first of all, we'll have Jeanette and Samantha read, and then I think Marta will be back up to introduce our next reader. Okay. Oh, and I should say that after the readings, we will have a conversation, so don't be surprised that we stay up here. Okay.
Thank you, Matvey. Thank you, Marta. And thank you all for being here. This is a beautiful library, and I'm very pleased to be here and very thankful for your attendance. Las diosas del agua, las llamaban así por ser portadoras de la máscara del dios y por tener un rostro propio y un corazón firme como la piedra. Soles, años, caminaron con el jade bajo su lengua en pos de la casa. Labraron la tierra y adornaron sus cuerpos con joyeles de oro, no como símbolo de vanidad, sino por ser cuidadoras del amaranto en su anhelo de flama. Xutecutli era su dios, Xutlatoa su lengua, lo cual quiere decir palabra de fuego, esa que enciende el corazón. Ellas cuidaban de no usar la xaltlatoa, palabra de arena que escurridiza huye sin dejarse aprender. Por las noches acompañaban en su descenso al sol. Ellas eran el jade y eran la transparencia. Purificaban el inframundo y descifraban el sino. En el más allá moraba su fundamento. Sus pétalos en canto se alzaban. Con himnos y flores ornaban su casa y su deseo llenaban de visión, fino cáliz de fulgor y semilla. Llevaban la mitad de su cuerpo sin cubrir. Eran brotes y omezóchil sus senos y su sueño verde yema de tepozán. Y de sus piernas florecían las blanquísimas plumas del quetzal. Así fue que Coatlicue, diosa madre, dio a luz al sol y a la luna.
Who were these goddesses? They were so called because they wore God's mask, and because their faces and hearts were resolute as stone. For days, years, they walked with jade beneath their tongues, seeking home. They worked the land and bejeweled their bodies, not as a sign of vanity, but because they tended the amaranth in their yearning for fire. Xutlekutli was their god, Xutlatoa their language, meaning words of fire, that which ignites the heart. They were careful not to use Xutlatoa, words of sand, fleeting, vague, and ununderstandable. At night, they accompanied the sun on his descent. They were jade, translucent, and purified the underworld, deciphering destiny. Their essence dwelt in the afterlife. Their petals arose in song. They adorned their home with hymns and flowers and filled their desire with vision, fine chalice of the sagacious seed. The upper half of their bodies naked, their breasts were buds of omexochil, and their verdant dreams the sprigs of a birch. From their legs blossomed the pure white feathers of the quetzal. Coatlicue, the goddess mother, gave birth to the sun and the moon.
From the second part, some fragments. Como una pausa en el olvido, las plumas se esparcieron sobre los senos de la luna.
Like a lapse in oblivion, the feathers scattered over the breasts of the moon.
¿Por qué escarchan tus ojos la débil claridad de la obsidiana? Thank you.
Why do your eyes frost over the weak brightness of obsidian?
Cuando sus manos lavaron el jade, ¿quién las acarició? ¿Quién hizo oscilar su falda de serpientes?
When their hands washed the jade, who caressed them? Who made their skirts of serpents rustle?
La luna, toda luz sobre su cuerpo, las empujaba en ráfagas de deseo.
The moon, all light on their bodies, urged them in gusts of desire.
Al retumbo del teponaztle, las estrellas se derrumbaron, fisuras se abrieron en las sombras de la alfarda.
At the sound of the teponatzle, stars tumbled, fissures opened up in the shadows of the alfarda.
Sobre un temblor de pétalos tus manos de rocío acarician la herida de la muerte.
Above a trembling of petals, your hands of dew caress the death wound.
Su alma, azor en el horizonte, bregaba contra la oscuridad del sol.
Their souls, goshawks on the horizon, fought against the darkness of the sun.
El vello de tu pecho entiende mis lágrimas más que tu corazón.
The hair on your chest understands my tears better than your heart.
In the closing poem, mi cuerpo cae en el agua, Mi cuerpo ha sido violado, mis restos en bolsas de plástico arrojados a la ciénaga, yazgo en el fondo del lodazal, permaneceré en el fango, días, noches, lunas, oscuras profundidades. Si yo pudiera alcanzar su rostro, mirarme en sus huesos, pero no. Esta la moral de nuestro mundo civilizado, cada día ha de ser más cruel. Agua, soplo del ave, 3 niñas desnudas junto al arroyo, su ropa dispersa en la alambrada. Di lo que los oídos sufrientes no quieren asumir. Di tu lamento por la expiración de aquella hora que no alumbra más. Di que tu regazo acoge la oscura queja, el eslabón raído, el último linaje de tu luz. Dime que la hora no mide el alma, sino el tiempo de la sangre. El silencio de los cuerpos retumba desde esta tierra desollada.
My body falls into the water. My body has been violated, my remains in a plastic bag, tossed into a swamp. I lie at the bottom in the mire. I will remain in the mud, days, nights, moon cycles, dark depths. If only I could reach their faces, peer into those holes, but no. The dominion of your name has been raised on high, and the doors have been shut fast. Such are the morals of our civilized world. Each day will be crueler than the last. Water, bird's breath, 3 naked girls next to the stream, their clothes scattered on barbed wire. Say what suffering ears would not hear. Speak your lament for the death of the hour that has ceased to give birth. Tell how your breast embraces hopelessness, that worn link, the final offspring of your light. The hour takes not measure of the soul, yet time is measured in blood. The silence of these bodies resounds throughout this barren land. Thank you.
Thank you.
And after that very moving reading, thank you so much. I'd like to introduce you to you now, the next readers, Lila Themborain and Christopher Winks, who are going to be reading from this most, I would say, dynamic book, Soft Matter by Quantum Prose. Lila Themborain, she is an Argentine writer. She's been teaching at the MFA, as I mentioned before, where I met her, the MFA in creative writing in Spanish at NYU. And she's the author of various books of poetry, many of them translated into English. Some of the titles are Guardians of the Secret or Mauve Sea Orchids. She has lately published the compilation of all of her work in Bajo la Luna in Argentina, and this is also the name of one of her books of poetry that I think precedes this one. So I would say, just to introduce briefly her poetry, if there is a concept or a leitmotif that I feel is prevalent throughout her poetics, I would say that that is actually her capacity to synthesize or fuse the language of science, the logical, the reasoning, with that subtle way that she has to convey the sensorial and the proprioceptive. In other words, she manages to fuse body and mind magnificently in her poetry. And I think that's why we chose this cover for this book. This is one of her drawings. She actually also draws in many of her books. And this square that represents logic's foundation, as you can see, the square of the scientific thought is transcended by this soft matter, flowy matter that is actually the poetic act. Christopher Winks, who will be reading his translations, magnificent translations of this book. He teaches comparative literature at a Queen College, CUNY. And besides this book, he has recently been working on Labyrinth, the selected on poetry and prose by Lorenzo Garcia Vega. And this is forthcoming at Station Hill Press. And he's also translating the Haitian surrealist poet Magloire Saint-Ouf, if I said that correctly. For the reading that's about to begin, we would like you to invite you to close your eyes, since that is apparently the way that this book has been typed, has been created with her eyes closed. She typed it, and hopefully we can hear about your experience of receiving this soft matter in such a way. So please welcome Chris and Lila for the reading.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting us to read. Thank you, Matvey, the Public Library, and Marta for publishing this crazy book with this crazy cover, and Chris for translating these poems, which I think were not very easy to translate. It was a lot of work for him.
Well, as Jose Lezama Lima said, solo lo difícil es estimulante, only the difficult stimulates. And I was thoroughly stimulated.
Poor
My neurons.
Poor you.
Not at all. Rewarded me.
Yeah.
We're actually going to do something a little different. We're going to begin with the translation, then go to the original, then Lila will read an original of the second poem, then I'll go to the translation, then read the translation of the third and final poem, and then we'll conclude with the original. So we begin in English and end in Spanish. So a little bit of a zigzag, a little bit of hard and soft matter. So I will begin. Okay.
So, as Marta said, these poems are square poems. These are all square, and I wrote them with my eyes closed. I just put the margins and tried to get into the end. And these are meditative poems in a way, and has to do also with the functioning of the mind, as she said before.
And I tried to follow the functioning of that mind as best I could, because I think that one thing that Jean-François Billeterre, a translator of Chinese poetry and the Chuang Tzu in particular, said, you have to enter in while translating as much as you can into the thought and spirit of the poet, almost to the point of identification. And I don't know if I succeeded, but I was stimulated. And I will now begin. Center of meditation, a square, the place to settle into in order to annul what's been seen or said, or the preoccupation of being in this space, all decentered bifurcations. To want or not want the clouds floating in the sky, the thoughts coming and going from this entity that propagates itself in abstruse or distorted sensations. I'm that. Those declensions of the mind that does not incline to nothingness, because nothingness would be the inevitable. Reward, redirect, frame oneself in this meditative square. Is it possible to pacify matter without the demonstration being merely a project? The sneeze moves forward, and somewhere the brain branches out. Somewhere the fingers begin to gain independence in the face of the blindness that implies a keyboard and shut eyes. Shut one's eyes to this trust. Follow the condition the mind provides. Decompress the zone that says nothing other than the splendor of opacity, these lights that tend to decompose beyond good and evil. Attach to the square this matter of time without accents, without preoccupations. Enclose oneself in a limitless space. Then sit down in front of the flarings of the self.
Centro de meditación es un cuadrado, el lugar para instalarse a rescindir lo que se ha visto o dicho, o la preocupación de ser en ese espacio todas las bifurcaciones descentradas. Querer o no querer, las nubes flotando en el celeste, los pensamientos que van y vienen de ese ente que a sí mismo se propaga en sensaciones abstrusas o tergiversadas. Eso soy, esas declinaciones de la mente que no se inclina hacia la nada, porque la nada sería lo inevitable. Recompensar, redirigir, encuadrarse en este cuadrado meditativo. ¿Es posible que la materia se apacigüe sin que la demostración sea simplemente un proyecto? Avanza el estornudo y el cerebro en algún lugar se ramifica. En algún lugar los dedos empiezan a independizarse ante la ceguera que implica un teclado y los ojos cerrados. Cerrar los ojos a esa confianza, seguir el estado que la mente suministra, descomprimir la zona que nada dice sino el resplandor de lo opaco, esas luces que tienden a descomponerse más allá del bien y del mal. Anexar al cuadrado esta cuestión del tiempo, sin acentos, sin preocupaciones, encerrarse en un espacio sin límites, sentarse entonces ante las fulguraciones del yo. En todo triángulo rectángulo entran cierta cantidad de cuadrados según la demostración del matemático. Pero en todo cerebro entran millones y millones de neuronas, comprimidas quién sabe de qué forma. Intrínsecamente es todo lo que sabemos para razonar la mente, que puede deducir a su vez las demostraciones de un teorema. La corteza cerebral trasluce en sus capas los estímulos que vienen del exterior y allí se procesan las respuestas que se dirigen a otras partes. Que en un cuadrado entren las nociones del tiempo y espacio es imposible de determinar, pero que en las 6 capas milimétricas que cubren el cerebro se produzca la conciencia es aún más misterioso. Algunos lo llamaron Dios. Hoy lo llaman mecánica cuántica o fenómeno de transducción. Yo lo llamo descuelgue, o así lo han llamado ellos. Es la oscilación que se produce en la corteza lo que nos separa del mono, no la corteza en sí que compartimos con los peces. ¿Será que todavía no tenemos la capacidad para nombrarla? Intuición, inconsciente, ojos abiertos, la noche de los tiempos. Vos y yo en este cuadrado inaudito, en donde resuenan, así como en los caracoles, las disonancias que nos llenan las horas.
Every right triangle fits a certain number of squares, according to the mathematician's proof, but every brain fits millions and millions of compressed neurons, who knows in what form. Intrinsically, that's all we know in order to reason out the mind that in turn can deduce the proofs of a theorem. The cerebral cortex reveals in its layers the stimuli coming from the exterior, and here the responses are processed that are directed elsewhere. Whether the notions of time and space can fit into a square is impossible to determine. But what is even more mysterious is that in the 6 millimetrical layers covering the brain, consciousness should be engendered. Some call it God. Today they call it quantum mechanics, or the phenomenon of transduction. I call it removal, or at least that's what they've called it. The oscillation occurring in the cortex is what separates us from the ape. Not the cortex in itself, we share that with the fishes. It could be that we don't have the ability to name it. Intuition, unconscious, eyes opened, the night of times. You and I in this unprecedented square where, as with seashells, the dissonances that fill our hours resound. Faces, traces, Broken seashells entangle the wall with fluxes and refluxes, turns and returns, untangling what would be the remainders of knowledge. Thus, the brain's seclusion in this position does not even admit the conflicting forms of an attachment. When shall we know? When shall we come to understand what the cortex examines in us? To stay gazing at a space of divergence where once there was random matter, matter now void, what it was we thought compact. How then understand what underlies two bodies? For sure, let's love what survives us, because what does not is definitely a waste product. Let's coralize pain. Let it become concrete matter of a roseate color. The moon does not stain the surfaces just so that resonance would be a misunderstanding. Circumstances indicate that fate is not insignificant. Careful with the skins that tell you otherwise. Eating is not the same as being eaten, nor is it the same that teeth devour you for the same reason they adorn you. Slurping would be the answer to so much decanting of shells and mollusks. Let the salty solution in your mouth be sustenance.
Rostros, rastros, rotos caracoles enredan la pared de flujos y reflujos, vueltas y revueltas, desenredando lo que fueran los restos del saber. Recogimiento del cerebro así, en esta posición, que no admite ni siquiera las formas encontradas de un apego. ¿Cuándo lo sabremos? ¿Cuándo vendremos a entender lo que nos ausculta la corteza? Quedarse mirando el espacio de entredichos en lo que fuera entonces una materia casual. Vacía está ahora la materia, aquello que creíamos compacto. ¿Cómo entonces entender lo que subyace entre dos cuerpos? Amemos, eso sí, lo que nos sobrevive, porque lo otro definitivamente es un desecho. Coralicemos el dolor, que se torne materia concreta de color rosáceo. La luna no mancha la superficie solo para que la resonancia sea un malentendido. Las circunstancias señalan que el destino no es intrascendente. Ojo con las pieles que te dicen otra cosa. No es lo mismo comer que ser comido. No es lo mismo que los dientes te devoren por la misma razón que te decoran. Aspirar sería la respuesta a tanta decantación de conchas y moluscos. Que la disolución salada en tu boca sustento sea. Thank you.
Thank you. What amazing readings tonight. And we will have one more reading, after which, of course, we will all remain here. And we're going to do a little bit of conversation and ask you to ask questions if you want. Our final reader for the night will be the translator of this book from World Poetry Books, which was brought out in the end of 2022, a book by Ennio Moltedo, the Chilean poet, of whom I believe it was Raul Zurita who said that he was one of the finest, greatest, most curious, and honorable poets of Chile. But I'm sure Marguerite will tell us more about him. Marguerite Feitlowitz won an NEA translation fellowship to work on this book. She's also translated Lilian Atlan, Griselda, my glasses, Griselda Gambaro, Salvador Novo, and Luisa Valenzuela. She is the author of the internationally acclaimed A Lexicon of Terror, Argentina and the Legacies of Torture. Her honors include 2 Fulbrights, a Radcliffe Bunting Fellowship. Her writing on literature, art, and human rights has appeared internationally. She has just celebrated a long tenure at Bennington College, where she founded and directed the program in literary and humanitarian translation. Please welcome Marguerite Feitlowitz.
so much, Matvey. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Marta. And what a night. This has just been wonderful to listen to you all, and especially to have my eyes closed. That was just lovely. So I will read some of the poems in both Spanish and English, but not all of them in the interest of time, because I think we're all perhaps eager to chat. This is a book of 113 prose poems that Ennio Moltedo wrote during and against the Pinochet dictatorship, but he did not publish his work, here's the original, until 1999 with the return of democracy to Chile. The other reason I'm not going to read all of the work bilingually is that this is a collection that gains a kind of cumulative power. So I'd rather read more rather than less, with your indulgence. Okay. The poems don't have titles, they have numbers. 1. ¿A qué hora deben cantar los pájaros formados en el jardín, en árboles o jaulas? Lea la ley. 1. I'm so untechy. 1. At what time must the birds lined up in gardens, trees, and cages sing? Look to the law. 2. Let's appoint the village madman, Chief Justice on the Court of Appeals with a vote and veto and seat at the table, a sane example to the debating powers that be and the people who in their hours of contemplation rest in chairs set out on the sidewalk, when twilight bloodies the screen with scrolls and pictures to make us believe that, of course, here it is, the disgusting, fleshy finale. Let's appoint the village madman. 10. Si pones el oído sobre la tierra desnuda, escucharás claramente el nombre de los asesinos. 10. If you put your ear to the naked earth, you will precisely hear the murderers' names. 11. Can we go on like this? Wherever one goes, on a walk, to work, to the desert, to the seashore, a hollow, a shelter, any place in the shade, there's a message, a sign at the foot of the column, in official gardens, among trees, even in ponds and underwater currents, in the tunnel, yes, under the bridge, in the office of the district attorney. By all the evidence, from every one of our pores, we are birthing the half-dressed dead. 12. They have sent me to the bottom of the sea, without oxygen, of course, in street clothes, with blue envelope in hand. This is the title poem, 15. Noche, from the Latin nox, from the Greek nintos, descended in turn from the Sanskrit nakta. In German, one says Nacht. In English, night. In Portuguese, noite. In French, nuit. In Catalan, nit. In Walloon, nuta. In Chile, night is eternal. 21. Once you've been thrown out and good riddance, you can't go back home. Even when out of sight and out of mind, you set out again as an old man to go back to the place that gave you comfort, the country you called home, because the country you called home has disappeared. 23. It's easy, plowing end to end, slitting the country end to end, back and forth, one furrow next to another, like bleachers in the stadium, as seen from the air, their traces sinking ever deeper, night and day, until they appear, until we hear their screaming. We're here, my darling, here. 24. El corazón general no late, pero existe. Lo que podemos llamar, en momentos sentimentales, el corazón colectivo no es la suma de los corazones individuales. El corazón general es un artefacto único y quien lo encuentra puede darse por muerto. 24. The general heart doesn't beat, though it exists. What we can call, in sentimental moments, the collective heart is not the sum total of individual hearts. The general heart is a unique artifact, and whoever finds it can consider himself dead. 57. Write me a law. Write it by hand. a law that lays down a life sentence to read and listen to poetry, including the epic with its prefab prosody and caterpillar cadence, rhymed gunshots and bared breasts to excite the listeners, and then what happens, happens. Write me a law with a gold-tipped pencil on a table in the burnt-out palace so I can legally, always legally, spend the rest of my life safe and snug and laughing at all the movies. A law so we can breathe, or at least an ordinance, something simple and local that will let us live in some cranny while the wind carries off or carries in the sound of guns. '66. Un esqueleto más y quedaré hablando solo, comprando huesos, tocando la flauta, el tambor con huesos, presentando materiales, plantaciones, viveros, hasta el día de la cosecha y la gran exportación de tallos y huesos. 66. One more skeleton and I'll be left talking to myself, buying bones, playing the flute, playing the drums with bones, pointing the way to fields, plantations, and nurseries until the day of the harvest and the great exportation of stems and bones. I'll read just the last two poems. 92. ¿Y qué haremos con todo el amor acumulado en países lejanos? Devolución de cenizas. 92. And what shall we do with all the love accumulated in distant countries? Return the ashes. And this is the last poem I'll read and the last poem in the collection. 113. Los esperamos en la orilla azul. Vengan de todos los rincones. Vengan traperos, santeras, gitanos, mendicandos, cuenteros, promocionantes, mandaderos, vergonzantes, pedigüeños, etc. El mar los desnuda y se lleva la mugre. 113. We wait for them on the blue shore. Let them come from every corner. Rag sellers, cure sellers, wandering tale tellers, ad runners, errand runners, the shamefaced, the abased, and etc. The sea washes them naked and carries away the slime. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming again. And so I just should say that I maybe didn't make it clear before, but the Colloquy series is a series that we started because we wanted to also have conversations with translators and conversations when possible with translators and their authors, or between translators and their authors, and between different translators. So we always have this kind of conversation and Q&A, and we hope you'll have questions. And of course, if any of you have questions for each other, that's totally cool too. And there is another mic there, so be prepared. And I think there's a mic that will be passed around. So once we open it up. So did you want to start with anything? I can start. Okay, I have a question for our first readers, Jeanette and Samantha. Thank you both for coming from so far to make this happen. I wanted to ask a kind of practical question that arose from working with you, because this book had been published in translation in the UK earlier by Shearsman, and in the US edition with World Poetry, I realized you really wanted to do some other things with it, not only design-wise, but also in the text itself and how you worked together on that. And I wondered if you could talk about that process a bit.
Okay, so when we started working together on this translation, the collection was still a work in progress. So Jeanette was still revising the manuscript when I began translating it shortly after the beginning of the COVID shutdown. So I had a lot of mental space and kind of the silence that I think is necessary for poetry to happen. And that was the first gift and blessing. So when it came time for us to hand you the manuscript, there were a number of differences between the original, because Jeanette had continued honing it, and then what I had done as a translation. So we kind of together we went back over the translation because we knew it was a bilingual edition with the text on FAS, and we kind of thought carefully about, in some cases the original sounded better in Spanish than in English than if I had kind of revised the translation to match the revised Spanish. So there are slight differences in the text if you look at it really kind of word by word carefully. And I think the other exciting thing was about the cover, and I think your suggestion was really inspired to use a detail. But you should talk about that, Jeanette, because Patricia is your friend.
Thank you, Sam. I have a friend. Her name is Patricia Baez, and we met since we were 5 at school, and she's a wonderful artist, and she worked with what you all know as the Aztec calendar, which is not really an Aztec calendar. They say it is an Aztec calendar, but it is much more intricate because it's called the Tonalpohualli. It's a ritual calendar with 4 cardinal points. And we have the white, the black, the white, the black. And in the center, we have the 5th sun. So we are all, according to pre-Hispanic ancient mythology, we are the children of the 5th sun. And why is this? Because each one of the 4 cardinal points was dominated or guided by the white, which is Quetzalcoatl, and the black, which is Tezcatlipoca. Why is he white and why is the other guy black? Because the whiteness is when you look at yourself in the mirror and then you get the true reflection of the self. In the other hand, we have the black one who went to see himself in the mirror and it was all distorted. That is when we are not able to see ourselves in the true mirror. So this fight against the whiteness and the blackness in our own lives is the spiritual and the material. You're talking about matter, Lila, but this is another kind of matter. We're talking about the not self, not seen, or the not self seen deformated or deconstructed. So in this fight of the 4 points, there's always a struggle to become what we are. And then until the 5th sun is created, and it is created by the descent of Quetzalcoatl to the Mictlán, then he is responsible for our lives. So the 5th sun is called Nahui Olin, which is the sun of movement. What part of our body, when we die, still moves? The heart. So why were they extracting the heart from the bodies? We look at it as being something savage, barbarian, but we have to think of the only way they had to survive was giving the sun some blood for it to eat. So that is why they offered the sun, okay? So in this book, but this is the explanation of the glyphs of the Tonalpohualli, the Aztec calendar. So Patricia Baez made 20 different crystal-colored sculptures, which are very big, which she's going to have in an exhibit in Mexico consulates and the consulate of Mexico in Houston. So they are very tall, like 2 meters tall, two by 1. So we sent Matvey the 20 of them. And this is a detail chosen by Matvey for the cover, so I think it's just beautiful. And then the interior of the book is just so beautiful. I think that as a whole, Matvey, the book is very aesthetic. It's very ethical work. So we thank you for it. I don't know if I complicated things more. I always tend to do that, but doesn't it?
It's kind of cool because you can see here, these are actually the numbers from their numbering system. And the fragments that we read you in the middle, those short tercets, are all numbered with the original numbering system, numbers 1 through 52. And then the pyramids are kind of reflected. These are inverse pyramids in the text too. So it really is a kind of a work of art in terms of typesetting and layout. Yeah.
I have a question for Lila and Chris regarding their book. We could argue sometimes that neuroscience is not that different from poetry in the sense that they both use the mind to analyze the mind. So as a poet, I feel like in this book you are a neuroscientist, Lila, and actually some critics have said this is a neuropoetics, right? So my question for you both is, what was your quest? What was your goal? What was the adventure of knowledge that you were trying to attain? And what were some of your findings in relationship to language that you had with this book and the very specific method that you had writing this book in comparison with other books that you wrote? And also for Chris, what was like to be, also what were your challenges and findings like translating this book?
Okay. I was fascinated by all the neuroscience things that I began reading during like maybe more than 10 years ago, and without understanding a word, because I'm not a scientist, but I was completely intrigued about how matter can create mind. It's a very simple question, but for me it was like a very intriguing thing. And at the same time, I was tired of always editing my work forever. So that was something else that was going on in my mind. So I said, I'm just going to write poems without editing at all. And so how could I do something like that? And I don't know, I started doing these square poems and writing them with my eyes closed, and I said, well, I edited a little bit. This is not, but mostly I didn't. So I wanted just to have a poem and have it there and do not do anything else with it. The only thing I wanted to do is, when I was closing my eyes, was to get to the inferior side of the square. And so all the things I was reading about the mind and became kind of mixed with images, and some are more kind of scientific and some are more, most of them I think is thinking about what is a border, what is a fixed border, like the el cráneo, ¿cómo se dice? The skull. The skull is something rigid, and I thought like the square was like the skull, and the writing inside should go everywhere, different places. And that's why I did also these drawings, which is, I feel a little bit ashamed, but Marta likes it, which is the mind getting out of the square, like a crazy thing. But yes, this is an obsession, no? I had an obsession with borders, words without borders. And I wrote a book also on membranes. I like the scientific language a lot because it gives my mind a lot of ideas and images, even though if I don't understand, I kind of like to play, it's not playing but it's playing at the same time with the language and trying to get certain understandings, specifically in this book, about how things traspasa, how do you say, transpose the borders, cross the borders, and the mind is crossing a border that is matter. So this is the main thing that I was thinking about, and it went then on a kind of meditation on what the square is, and then I started to see squares all over. And for example, the 9/11 memorial, I have at the end some poems about the 9/11 memorial, which are squares, and how that square contained in the water that is going down the lives of so many people that we could also touch with that moving water in a rigid or in that square. It also projected to Sandy, because this I wrote in those years when Sandy was there, and how the houses and the windows, they are squares, and they are protecting us from all those horrible winds that we were living and that affected so many people. So it's how the border is opening you to the outside, but also protecting you from the outside. And so this is more or less a lot. So.
And I too have no background in neuroscience, but I am definitely a follower of Glissant's notion, Edouard Glissant, the Martinican poet and philosopher, who said that everybody has the right to opacity, and opacity was a word that occurred here. And the thing is that you struggle with the difficulty, and when I think of there's a constraint in the square, but there's also Joseph Alber's homage to the square. There's the revolutions of the squares in Tahrir Square and elsewhere during the so-called Arab, actually North African as well, spring, so that actually the squares can, in fact, Pete Mondrian's utopian paintings, that this, I all saw it as part of it, because again, the scientific stuff I'm very bad at, but I think that in a sense, poetry transcends all the disciplines, and it transcends science. It incorporates science into it. And always I had the thought that this is a consciousness that's at work, eyes closed and all that. And I tried, when translating, to have a certain amount of speed in making my versions. I didn't stop halfway through any of the individual sections. I just kept going. And then, of course, later I see I made some big mistakes. And, of course, Lila and Marta were very helpful in the editing process, because it's sort of like did I really do that? But the point was that I wanted to get into the speed of it. And that's almost paradoxical, because you see words in a square and it seems kind of frozen, but there's a lot going on. There's an attempt in the language to burst the bounds, right? To use constraint in order to question constraint. And for me, it was a wonderful, wonderful challenge as well, because I first, it was the Sandy poems that I first translated of yours and read in public at the King Juan Carlos Center in the context of an homage to Jules Solar. And that was very exciting for me, who had lived through Sandy, and when the wind was such that you thought that those windows would buckle, right? Buckle and maybe, get fractured, and but they held. And for me, it's kind of like it reminded me while translating of that moment as well. The idea of it's constrained, but it's bursting the bounds in some way. Language has that power, and my work is mere approximation, as you heard. But Leela's poetry, I just felt I had a wonderful time doing it. Difficulty and all, because again, to re-quote Les Ama Lima, only the difficult stimulates.
I want to add something. It took us forever because he gave me the translations and I'm a very bad pupil. I never read them, so it took forever for me to read. How long did it take?
Oh, well, it was a couple of years,
Yeah,
I think.
more than
And I set it aside for a while, too.
Yes.
But then coming back to it, it was like I'd never left.
Yeah, no, and I think it was good that time in the middle. Then we could edit. And Marta, I'm so grateful that you published this book. Marta is amazing, the work that you're doing with Quantum Pro. So thank you so much.
And
I
Marta
love it.
herself is a pretty considerable poet. She, and hopefully the world will know that soon in the English.
Yeah. No, and also the design is very particular because she put like white pages in the middle of each thing. You can say that.
Yeah, that's something that we decided to do instead of like having the poems face each other. Like I thought that, I mean, the most important translation that is going on here is the dialogue, the dialectics that Leela is having with that void space of the mind. So I wanted to remind the reader constantly to go back to the white instead of going back to another language. So that's why we decided to have the translations not face each other, just facing the white page.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's a great solution. With that, I mean, there were also some interesting choices we had to make with Night, but I wanted to ask Marguerite specifically just to, since you're here without an author, as is often the case for a translator, obviously you didn't have a connection, a living person to dialogue with in this case. No?
I didn't have the living poet.
No, right.
To,
exactly. That's what I meant.
To have
yeah.
coffee with and dinner with and things like that. But I did have, I had the really huge privilege of working with, Ennio Maltedo was part of a very strong circle of friends in the city of Valparaiso. Artists, architects, cartoonists, poets, filmmakers. And they were very protective, each of the other. And they have been wonderful to me. And so one of his friends, the poet Luis Andrés Rodriguez, who is sort of the keeper of his archive in his own home, sat with me last August, and we went through. I have the original manuscript of this book, Night, Noche, La Noche, and some other things as well. So there was always someone I could ask. But I also have a very close colleague, Jonathan Pitcher, who's a Chilean specialist, and he gave me a tip that was one of these fine distinctions that changes everything for you. I had some questions, and I said, these poems are so concise. And he said, no, they're terse. And I thought, oh, right. And that just changed everything for me. I mean, this book is, it's full of very controlled rage. Mm-hmm. He uses, you're fascinated with language of neuroscience. He used a lot of language of the law. And the language that was, and language of economics that was being used in Chile at the time. So I did have that advantage. I also would like to say something about the design of this book, because every material part of this book, let me just remove my pages, was Chileno. So the image on the cover is by the great painter Nemesio Antunes, and Mate very heroically dealt with the estate and the foundation. The typeface was designed in Chile. All the letters, the titles, everything but the poetry is Chileno, and it was printed actually in Lithuania. But everything, we really wanted to have something that was materially Chileno, and you insisted on it, and I'm still so grateful.
We have a little bit more time. Maybe we can have a few questions from the audience. So if anyone wants to raise their hands. Anybody? Burning questions? Yes, over there. James Loop.
Yeah, I have a question for the translators about when you're translating a book-length project. It seems like these are all sort of like books that deal a lot with seriality and sequence. Is there a way that that is kind of enabling? Is there a way that that's a kind of positive experience or a generative experience? And also I'm thinking, like, is there a way that it is challenging? I'm imagining having to pay attention, for example, to the way like a word might resonate through a sequence of poems in a slightly, heightened, you have to be in a sort of heightened state of awareness that maybe if you were translating a book of sort of like discrete poems, maybe you'd give yourself more space to use that word in a different, to use a different word to translate that. Just like, I guess, like how that experience intersects with the task of translating is something that I'm curious about.
I would say this is a poem where the poems are, a book rather, where the poems are numbered. And one of the things that was really interesting looking at the original manuscript was the numbering went through various versions. So he kept moving poems around, and that was fascinating to see. When I was translating the poems, I just decided not to be constrained by the fact that it was numerical. I didn't know that he himself had moved the poems around. I just translated the poems that immediately spoke to me in any order at all. And but as I did this, I always keep a notebook, a kind of lexicon of images that recur, words that seem to be charged or that recur, and words that he uses or that the writer uses in a very particular way. So I've got that. And then it was very important at different stages, once I had all of the poems translated, to then go back and observe how that worked out numerically and following his order. What's really interesting to me about that is that sometimes, I mean, he is deliberately, we have these 113 poems in this order, and yet there are poems that definitely feel to me disconsonant in the, they feel out of order. I think, well, why didn't you put this here and put this here? This would go nicely here, and this would go nicely there. So he's also, as you're playing with constraint, I think he's also playing with the order of imposed orders, even as he insists on it up through 113. So,
could it also be perhaps, that as much as every translator is an editor, every writer is an editor too, and as you're putting like you made a direct reference to this, Leela, you're revising and revising your work, and eventually sometimes I think you just have to say it's time to stop and move on. And I think the thing about being a translator is that there's no closer reader for that author than the translator, because you have to think about every word and every positioning. And, perhaps if you had had the opportunity to work together with him, you could have had that conversation and move things around a little bit in a way that would take your perspective in.
or have been upbraided, right? Scolded.
Yeah, it's entirely possible.
I worked from the first to the end. I go in sequence, to kind of get the sense of, the movement of the whole. But I would say my main concern always, because this is syntactically very difficult poetry, and it sets a lot of traps for the translator that you have to be very mindful of. And so when, in coping with that, I can never forget that what it counts is the music of the words. That if you don't bring the music, it's not really poetry. The way in which the the phrases unfold, where you would put the accents. You always imagine that you yourself, at least I do when I'm translating, I imagine myself reading it, right, out loud. And, that the emphases go somewhere. And if there's a bump in, that reading out loud, then maybe there's something I've not paid attention to, because the original here is, I would say, very musical, and I'll just say that. I'll just leave it at that.
I realize I didn't answer your question, James, which is I also work in sequence, and I think it was important for this text to work in sequence. In fact, there were so many kind of concepts that we felt were important to keep consistent throughout the text, and also, reappeared enough that we put a glossary in the back, because there are certain concepts and terms, as Jeanette explained to you, like the struggle between lightness and darkness, that are really integral to the appreciation of the text. So we were grateful to you, Matvei, for allowing us to put that in there at the end.
Maybe we have time for one more. I don't know where Joel is. Yeah, is that good? One more question if anyone has one? Roz? Yeah, Roz has a question. Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Okay. So my question has to do with for translators and for the authors too, maybe in the first encounter with the text and the decision to translate it, because I am in an MFA program right now, and I took a workshop where blah, blah, blah. We got paired with students in other MFA programs. I was translating from Spanish with a Chilean student. And my deepest regret in that process was that in my first reading, I was already thinking about translating it. And I regret that deeply, because you can never get back that first encounter. And I'm wondering, in coming across these texts, whether when they came to you, you already knew you were going to translate them, or how that process of wanting to arrive at them in English, how that happened, and maybe how to temper actually the impulse to translate while you're reading before it's time to do that.
Fantastic question. Translators, what do you say?
I'm kind of a follower of the Gregory Rabassa school of translation. I was asked by Leela, because I had translated the Sandy poems for that event that we mentioned, to do this, and I just, without reading it beforehand, I just plunged in, because I trusted the quality of Leela's work, having seen it before. So just like Rabassa never read a book that he translated beforehand, he just jumped right in medias res, so to speak, and just went from there, because you're mimicking the experience of a reader, essentially. And as Samantha said, the translators really, we hope to be the best readers of the author we translate, that we pay attention to so many more things than the casual reader does. So, in a sense, the discovery happened along the way of doing the work, which, not to say that your approach is invalid, it's just this was the one that I myself chose to do. So, I understand where you're coming from completely. I just, I guess I'm an impatient kind of guy, so.
I really relate to what you're saying about reading something and feeling the translation sort of coming through you at the same time. Ennio Moltedo was really a gift to me. I had not heard of him. I was visiting Santiago on other business. I was in a bookstore. I had a whole list of Argentine novels that I intended to buy, and I was doing quite well selecting them off the shelf. And from behind me came a voice: "Basta con la narrativa argentina. Estás en Chile, país de poetas. Sentate." So, and it was, you know, enough with the Argentine novels. You're in Chile, land of poets. Sit down. In the familiar usage, no less.
Yes.
So I sat down, and I was brought many books of contemporary poetry, including La Noche. And as soon as I opened it up, the translation was beginning. And so I never had, and I went back to my hotel and just let it happen. And then I had other things, but I think I experienced it anyway. There are many different kinds of excitement when you're immersed in a project. They don't always have that fire, that amazement of the first exposure, but there is that sense of a growing intimacy, sort of a growing appreciation of sometimes the strangeness, sometimes the agon, you know, with one's own sort of blockheadedness sometimes. But I think it's not just the excitement of the first moment. There's so much to come if you stick with it. And it's all ahead of you.
So I'm going to pass this question to Jeanette because she's translated the complete works of Elizabeth Bishop into Spanish, and she's working very closely with Anne Carson on her poetry into Spanish as well. So I'm very curious to know how you would answer that question. Are you willing?
Well, I was thinking that I don't think I could translate. I was given some poems to translate from a poet which is wonderful. He's now dead, and I had a very hard time. But instead with, for instance, Alda Merini or Charles Wright, one line, I said, I'm going to translate them, one line. So it is something that I connected with, and that was very alleviating for me. So translation also has to do with healing something very deep inside you. The pain of the other is your own pain. And I had to go to psychoanalysis for many years before I could heal madness that was in my house. And it came through Alda Merini, not through analysis. So I think that translating is a way to translating the saddest self in you, or the ununderstandable self in you. The other gives you the answers.
I want to add that when I read the translations, I have a very good collaborator, which is my son, Lorenzo Bueno, who ended up translating a book of mine also, because I usually ask, I read the translation, for example, Chris did the translation or other translations, and I say, Lorenzo, what do you think? Because he has like a feeling of the American English, and I'm an Argentinian, so I don't have the feeling of the American English. So that's the moment that finally we ended up collaborating with him, and he translated a book of mine. But many of these poems, Lorenzo was also an editor, yes. Which was a very interesting situation for me, because when I speak English and I can write, but you don't, for the translator, you know what you're doing, but for the translatory, I don't know how you say that, you don't know if that is what you did. And so, since my son is completely bilingual, it's very interesting, you know, like the situation. But of course, the rhythm of your work, because you mentioned it before, the musicality and everything is amazing, and everything you did with the translator, as a translator. Thank you so much.
With your help, and Lorenzo too.
Thank you.
I
On that-
just
oh,
want
one more
to
thing.
say one
Yeah.
more thing. My son Juan also was my help in translating the School of Wallace Stevens with Hart Crane. I don't know if it was Wallace Stevens or Hart Crane, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I would say, please, Juan, please come and help me with this word. He says, I'm just coming from the disco. I have 10 tequilas on top. I said, please, just one word, and he would give it to me. So it comes in the family. They know better.
That's amazing. On that very, very positive note for translation and all of this appreciation of translators, we can end the formal part of the evening. We will have books and signing outside. We'll ask our readers to proceed out there so you can talk to them unencumbered. And also, we hope that you will continue to follow BPL Presents, and we thank the library very much. We thank our co-sponsored press, all the co-sponsors of this event, and of course Montez Press Radio for broadcasting and archiving this event. I believe it will also be on BPL's Facebook Live, and so that'll be archived there. Please follow World Poetry Books if you want to on social media or wherever. All of those places if you want to keep in touch about or hear more about the next colloquy events with more translators. And I would like us to thank Lila Zembarain, Christopher Winks, Marguerite Feitlowitz, and Samantha Schnee and Jeanette Clarion for coming to the Brooklyn Public Library tonight. Thank you. Thank you, Marta, and thank you, Joel, and I hope everyone has a good night. We'll see you out in the lobby to look at some books and talk.